questions you have right off the bat, but I can also just give you a little more of an overview of what I do in my job, if that would be helpful. Okay, I'm seeing a thumbs up there. So like I mentioned, I'm a reference and instruction librarian, and going back even a little farther than that, in my undergraduate degree in college, for my bachelor's degrees, I was a sociology and art history double major. And so those were kind of the subjects that I decided to focus on, which of course, neither of those is what I'm doing now. There are some undergraduate degrees in library studies or library science, but not very many. Most librarians have degrees in something else for their undergrad. And then my master's degree is library and information studies. And so in my job, I do kind of three main things. The first is instruction. And so I don't teach any credit classes like most of the classes you'll take in college, but I do teach what we call like one-shot information literacy sessions. So you may have had this in high school where you went into the library or a librarian came into your class if you were working on a specific paper or research assignment. And kind of I work with the students to make sure they know about all of the library resources that they can use for their assignments and how to evaluate information, how to search, how to write citations, kind of anything related to the research process. So that's the instruction or the teaching part that I do. And then I also work on the reference desk, and that's where, if you've been at a high school library or a public library, when you walk up to the desk and check in with a librarian. And again, there I'm mostly helping students answer questions about their research, finding sources or writing citations, but also sometimes questions like, I need help using Microsoft Word, or I need help printing, or some of those technology type questions too, I answer at the reference desk. And that was back when we were in person. My college is still mostly in remote operations, and I'm working from home. And so we do also have a virtual reference, which is actually 24/7. And we're not the librarians staffing it at 3 a.m. That's actually librarians from overseas who are doing that. And then we're answering their students' questions. So sometimes I'll be talking to students from England when it's there like 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and I'm helping them through this online chat reference. So that's another part of what we do for reference, helping students. And then the third part of my job is kind of the collection development part. So deciding which books and online videos and electronic journals and newspapers and magazines, all of those resources in the library, which of those we should be buying that are new, and which ones that we should be removing if they're not relevant to our programs anymore or they're outdated. So kind of that whole collection process is another big part of what I do. And I actually focus on kind of the business and health sciences parts of our collection, which, as you'll notice, has nothing to do with sociology or art history. I have no expertise in those areas. I've just kind of learned on the job what are the most important resources in those areas as I've worked with faculty and students in those classes. And so that's been fun to get to know more about those areas. And then I am a faculty member at our college. Not all librarians who work at colleges or universities are faculty, like the faculty who teach classes. Sometimes they're staff or something else. But I'm a faculty member, which means I also have responsibilities to be on campus committees and go to lots of meetings and help make decisions about the college, and be involved with different events on campus and be involved in the community as well. So that's another kind of big part of my job is doing all of that broader campus work that's not specific to the library. So those are kind of the main parts of what I do in my job. And so I'm happy to talk more about kind of how I got there. And if anyone has any questions right away, I'd most like to answer what you're curious about.
How was your college life like, or like time and managing it and the workload and stuff like that?
Yeah, good question. I think for the most part, I was pretty good at managing my time in college. I think one of the things that actually helped me manage my time was I kept pretty busy it wasn't like I was just going to my classes and I didn't really have anything else. I went to a 4-year school, and so I was living there on the college in the dorms, but I was also involved with some different student organizations, and I had work study as part of my financial aid. And so kind of they paid me money that I paid directly into my tuition, and that was part of that financial aid. And so I was working on campus in the campus ministry office, and I also worked with some elementary school students, kind of helping them in an after school program. And so for me, kind of keeping busy in all of those different clubs and organizations, as well as going to classes, meant that I had to structure my time really intentionally to make sure that I wasn't leaving things always until the last minute, which I definitely still did at times, writing papers right down to the last minute. But for me, that was what was helpful. I know now sometimes when I have too much free time, I think, oh, I have all this free time. And so I don't have to worry about doing things, but then I use all my free time by doing nothing or silly things. And then all of a sudden I have less time, versus when I'm busier, I have to think more strategically about, okay, I have this project, it's due on this date, but here I have these other things. So I'm going to do this part in the next couple hours. I'll do this part on this day, and then I'll be finished. So I did use, like I had a paper planner. That was what really worked for me. But whatever type of sort of calendar or planner works for you, to think about, which assignments you have due for which classes on which days, that was really helpful for me to make sure that if I realized like, oh, I have a lot of things due on this day, I'm not going to want to leave them all until the last minute. That was really helpful. Does that answer your question? Yeah, okay. And then I see a question in the chat here from Yuzma, something I really miss about being in college. It's another good question. I think for me, I miss being around other people, and especially being around my friends on a regular basis, because I was able to live at the college and I had a roommate. It was nice to kind of have that interaction and people that you could just sort of say, hey, do you want to get dinner together? Or what are you doing this weekend? We should plan, or kind of having study parties and things like that. And I think most of us were kind of working jobs, whether we were working jobs on the college as part of that work study, or some people were working jobs outside of the college. So we were definitely busy, but we were just kind of all there and all focused on college at the same time. And so we were able to make time for each other. Whereas I find now as an adult that people are very busy with their jobs, and then many people have families. And because we're not sort of physically all located right in the same little space, it's harder to make plans to see each other, rather than just like walking down the hall to someone's door and being like, hey, what are you doing? Can I hang out with you right now? You have to like text someone to say like, can I come over? Or do you want to come over? Or let's plan something for later. So I really liked that aspect of college, of just being very close to a group of people in a community that, usually if you wanted to hang out with people, there was some place that you could go to do that. There was some event going on campus that you could very quickly get to, or a group of friends you could hang out with.
What is an advice that you would give to people who are shy, or how to like find your own friend group, or meet other people in college?
Great question. Yeah. I would consider myself sometimes an introvert or shyer, and it comes out at different times when I'm doing presentations like this, or when I'm teaching with my students. I think I feel comfortable doing that because I have a lot of practice doing it. So it's easy to talk and feel confident. Although I usually still get a little nervous at the beginning. But when it's in terms of like making friends and meeting people at college, one thing that's really helpful is just if you have a roommate right away, there's sort of automatically someone that you're living with, and you're just right there with each other. And so you kind of have to talk to each other in some ways and have some conversations. And sometimes you realize that you have more to talk about and you kind of become friends. And other times you realize like, you know what, maybe we don't have a lot in common, or maybe we have really different class schedules, so you don't see a lot of each other. But that's kind of the initial, I think, place that it can start. And then I think whether it's in your classes or finding kind of on-campus activities, things you're really interested in, and going to those, because the other people at those are also likely interested in the same things. And so boom, you've got something in common with someone. So you have something to talk about. Which I think can be one of the hardest things for someone who's shy to figure, like, what do I even say to someone when I'm first trying to start a conversation? Like, I want to talk to this person and it just feels like, what, I don't know what to say. And so, if you're at a meeting where you're learning about volunteering, right? Like it's a volunteering club, then you kind of have the, like, what kind of volunteering have you done before question that you can ask them, because they have, because they're there for volunteering. And then they'll probably say something in their answer that you can pick up and be like, oh, hey, I've done that too. Or, wow, that sounds really interesting. Tell me more about that. And then hopefully kind of those conversations go organically from there. And then it's sort of like, well, we're at the club meeting and then we do some events together and have more conversation. And by creating those shared experiences, you're able to find other ways that you can connect, whether it's because you have similar experiences or whether you have different experiences and you're kind of learning from each other and enjoy being around each other. So I think finding things that you're interested in and kind of joining those clubs, or if it's in your classes, kind of asking, like, are you taking this class because you have to or because you're actually really interested in it? And then trying to kind of find, again, I like to find things that I can have in common with people to talk about them. But you could also go the opposite way of saying, like, hey, I just heard you share this really different experience than what I've had. I'm so interested. Can you tell me more, or tell me how you did that, or whatever it is. That's my approach. It's maybe not the best advice, but that's what I've used. All right. I'm seeing another couple of questions here. How did I know this was the right career for me? And what career mistake has given me the biggest lesson? That second one is a really tough question, but I'll think about it a little more while I answer the first one. So for librarianship, I had a cousin when I was growing up who was much older than me, and she was a children's librarian. So I think for me, I sort of knew this was something you could do as a real job. And I knew that she had gone to graduate school in order to do that job. But I sort of, like, that was just off in the distance as a possibility. And then when I was in college and I was doing art history and sociology, I decided I didn't really want to do either one of those as a job. I didn't want to do research as a sociologist or teach sociology or art history. I thought a little bit about being a curator at a museum, so kind of deciding what art should be in the museum or in an art exhibit, and doing the research about the art. But I was a little more familiar with libraries than I was with art museums. And again, kind of remembered, like, oh, right, my cousin is a librarian. So actually the thing that kind of made me know this was the right career was the summer before my senior year of college. I had the opportunity to shadow at a community college library. And that was something I just initiated on my own. It wasn't a program through the college. I just thought it would really help me to know if I want to do this by spending some time with people who are actually working in a library. So I was able to set that up and got to sort of shadow all of the different people at the library doing different jobs, because there are lots of people working in libraries that don't do exactly what I do. There's people who do more of the checking in and out books and working with resources or planning events and doing things like that. There are people who do the really technical side of troubleshooting databases and writing code and hosting websites, and people who do the book cataloging, deciding how the books are classified and making sure the online catalog has all the right information so people can find things. And then there's lots of different kinds of librarians too, right? There's public librarians, school librarians, college and university. There's law librarians, tribal librarians, science and health librarians. So it's really a huge field. But I sort of, when I reached out to some different libraries to decide where to shadow, the public library sort of said, like, oh, I don't know if we can help you. And the community college library said, yeah, absolutely, come on by. And so that was probably a major thing that made me realize I liked the community college setting. I liked that it was sort of a mix of some of the aspects of public libraries and some of the aspects of academic or college libraries. And so that experience was really what helped me know this is the right career. I can see myself doing this because I have done a little bit of it. I've seen people doing this work. So that's kind of what solidified librarianship for me. And then the career mistake that's given me the biggest lesson. The thing that came to mind for me was in I guess it was a couple of years ago now, we had our like library director had left, and we had an interim person who didn't have any experience in libraries. They were kind of the tutoring director, but they were helping out while our person was gone, and we were trying to hire a new director. And kind of there were some challenges there because they didn't have a lot of expertise in our area. So a lot of my colleagues and I felt like they weren't doing kind of the best job they could, and they just didn't have enough attention to give to the library. And then as we started thinking about who the next director of the library was going to be, we were starting to hear that that person might not necessarily have to have library experience, which was concerning because we were seeing the effects of what that was, how that was happening. And we were also a little bit concerned that the person who was there in the interim role might apply for that position. And so as we were forming sort of some committees and meetings to talk about this, my colleagues and I decided to write this letter sort of saying, here are the concerns we have, and we don't think that this person or anyone who's interested in the full-time job should be part of these conversations. And it made a lot of sense to us at the time because of the concerns we had. But then once we sent that off, the feedback that we got from that person and kind of the people above them, their bosses, was really negative. And I think they didn't really like the way we were approaching it. They felt like we weren't creating a lot of trust. Like they wished we would have just maybe come to them and talked to them about our concerns instead of writing this more formal letter. Maybe felt like it was going above someone's head. And it just kind of, I think it gave a bad taste to that whole experience and maybe broke some trust for the rest of that process. And so it wasn't a big mistake, and it wasn't a mistake that I sort of personally made. But it was something that I think about a lot when I'm now in meetings or having conversations about how do we deal with this situation that doesn't seem to be going very well. And I think I've learned that it's better to try to trust people, to assume the best intentions, and then to ask them actually, like, what are your intentions? Instead of assuming this person was going to apply for the job, we could have asked them and said, are you going to apply for this job? And the answer would have been, no, of course not. I don't want this job. I'm not qualified for it. But we sort of made the wrong assumption and then broke some trust there. So, that doesn't have anything really that is specific to librarianship or what I've learned and in college or even in my job. It's kind of those soft skills, the things you learn on the job that I think are really important to pay attention to, kind of how you're relating to other people. Does that make sense? Yeah. All right, I see another question here. Is there something I wish I would have known before finalizing my field? That's a good question. I'm going to take a drink of water while I think about it. I don't think there really is anything. I really like my job. I really like my profession overall of librarianship. I think there are some problems with it, which I can talk a little bit about, but there's nothing that, so I think maybe I wish I would have been a little more aware of what some of the problems were with the overall field of librarianship before I started, but I don't know that it would have changed my decision. I think I would have still said, I care enough about this. I think this is important enough that I want to be part of it so I can help make change from the inside rather than trying to make change from the outside. And one of those things I was telling the last group is just that right now, most librarians have to go through a master's program, which is often very expensive. And so that can stop some people from becoming librarians because they just can't afford it. But so much of what I do in my job, like I was just describing to you, I feel like I've learned in the job, kind of doing the hands-on work. And so I wish that there was a better way for more people to become librarians without having to pay all of that money. I think that there is a lot of value to sort of the theory and the research that we do in graduate school when you're learning sort of about the history of librarianship and a lot of those big important concepts, that's important. But I also think there's a different model that we could use that would be less expensive to help people understand that and really value the work that they're doing in person or the work experience that they have. And thank you. I see the question of what can't they afford, and then the answer of a master's degree. Yeah, so the master's degree, so when you pay for college, your undergraduate degree, and then usually a master's degree, you're going to have to pay for separately. And I think most undergraduate degrees, there's a lot of financial aid options, particularly things like grants and scholarships that you don't have to pay back. And again, depending on your situation, master's degrees, usually there's not as much of that free money. It's mostly loans. Some people can get things like teaching assistant positions, or in certain fields, it's more common to have your master's degree paid for if it's kind of a really selective program. So there are certainly options to get help paying for that. But a lot of people, when they get master's degrees, they do it by taking out a lot of loans. And some of that is okay, because usually when you have a master's degree, you get paid more money for your salary. So it's easier to pay off those loans. But that still can be a challenge and something you need to think about. And not everyone is able to take on those loans or afford that master's degree or feels comfortable doing that in order to get the job. And if that doesn't make sense, feel free to unmute yourself or put more questions in the chat. The pandemic made me realize any new problems in the world that I've never thought about. Is that specific to my job and librarianship, or just in general?
Just in general.
Just in general. Yeah, wow, what a question. I'd like to think that a lot of the problems I think the pandemic has shown us are things that I was aware of or had thought about to some extent, but I maybe didn't have as clear of examples. I'm thinking about things like how the pandemic has affected people's ability to work from home, particularly if they have kids or other responsibilities, and how that's sort of disproportionately affected women as opposed to men, that women have had to give up their jobs, typically in sort of a male-female relationship or parenting situation. That's something that I feel like I've been aware of, but maybe we're really seeing it. The same thing with the way the pandemic is disproportionately affecting people of color. I think those are issues that I'm really thankful my college, I think, is doing a great job of providing us with lots of training and education around diversity, equity, and inclusion, and issues of social justice and those types of things. So I feel like I am aware that there are those systemic barriers, but the pandemic has really shown us how clearly we can look at those statistics and that they're affecting people's lives in a lot of ways. And then, yeah, so I think that's a problem that I'd like to think I've thought about to some extent, but maybe not in the same ways the pandemic has brought it up. Another thing that we're seeing is just the access to technology. As everything has gone online, there's a lot of students who didn't have their own computers or not even internet access. And that's true for some of our staff and faculty as well, that I knew that working in the library, we've always loaned out laptops to students. We know that students would come into the library because they needed to use a computer, they needed internet access. So we knew that, but I think that was a surprise for a lot of people when the pandemic started, of like, what, not everyone has internet? This is such a basic thing. And so I think a lot of those disparities and problems have been really heightened by the pandemic, but we knew about them, just not in the same way. I know we've got about 5 minutes left here. These are some great questions. I'm trying to think of some of the things I talked. Oh, go ahead.
I have a question. So where do you work at now? Like, do you work at a library or?
Yes, I work at a library at a community college, so a 2-year college in Vancouver, Washington, just by Portland, Oregon.
So you were.
Yes. What advice would you give to your younger self at the start of your career? Ooh, I think I would tell myself to be a little more confident that I'm getting things right the first time. Um, I I think it's my personality that when I'm doing things, I really want to get it right the first time. I want to be perfect, which is an unrealistic expectation. But when I'm doing work, like working on a project or putting something together, I like to take time to kind of get it as perfect as possible first myself. And then I like to kind of have a small group of people, maybe reach out to one person first to say, does this look okay to you? And then bring it to the larger group, which is fine. I think that's a good process. But I also think that there's times when it's helpful just to be able to say, like, I'm confident enough that I have the experience and the knowledge that I've put this together right the first time, and I can just send the email instead of taking 3 days to have different people review it, or that I can post a blog post on the library website myself without needing other people to look at it, because I think the feedback that I've gotten in my career has been overall really positive from my colleagues. And then the times where I have made mistakes, they've sort of gently said, you know what, this isn't quite the way we do things, or maybe you want to think about this in a different way. And so trusting that my colleagues will give me that feedback in nice ways, but that the majority of the time I should be confident in what I'm doing because I'm doing things well. That would maybe be the advice that I would give myself so that I could be a little less worried that I was actually doing things right. And then, yeah, so as a librarian, I do instruction. I'm teaching, kind of teaching students about the research process and resources they can use, both in classes and also at the reference desk when students come in person, or through our online kind of virtual chat, answering student questions that way. I'm buying books and other types of resources for the library, and then deciding which ones of those we should get rid of because they're old or not being used anymore. I work, and then because I'm faculty, I'm on a lot of campus committees and help making decisions, and do some pretty large scale planning and outcomes assessment to make sure that the work we're doing is actually meaningful and having a positive effect, versus just, well, we think what we're doing is important, but the data doesn't actually show that. Um, and then kind of the related question I'm going to skip, and I'll come back. Is it Melissa, to your question? Can someone work at the same job as I have but not have a degree? So there are people who work in libraries in more paraprofessional positions, staff positions, that usually when you say librarian, that does mean someone who has a master's degree. And so there are people that are kind of called librarians that technically aren't. I don't have a problem with that. I think anyone who works in a library could be considered a librarian. The titles don't really matter. But there are a lot of people who work in libraries and do really important work in libraries that don't have the master's degrees, that have just their bachelor degrees in whatever subject. Actually, I would say the majority of people who work in libraries probably don't have a master's degree. So you can certainly work in libraries without that degree. But you're not going to be officially a librarian or probably have the salary, the higher salary that comes with that professional degree and title. So then how long after graduation was I able to find a job? I started looking for jobs, I think, when I had about 5 months of my graduate program left, knowing that because I was looking at college libraries, that application process is usually could be up to 5 months long. So even though I wasn't technically finished, they could get me through the interview process and hire me kind of right when I was graduating. That didn't happen. No one wanted to hire me or give me any interviews during those first 5 months. So after I graduated, I graduated probably mid-May. I spent that whole summer looking for jobs and got a job in September. So it's probably about 4 or 5 months later that I found my first part-time job, and then another 9 months before I got a full-time